The civil war in Sudan that erupted on April the 15th, 2023, once again plunged the third largest African nation into chaos. 2 years on, diplomatic efforts to bring the two warring parties to the table have been in vain. The conflict has been characterised by atrocities such as ethnically targeted killing, rape as a weapon of war, and genocide. It's the second time in less than 30 years that a genocide has been perpetrated in Sudan. As the war grinds on, the fighting has not lost pace. In March, the Sudanese armed forces successfully recaptured the capital, Khartoum, and last month, the opposing Rapid Support Forces took control of the strategically important northern state bordering Libya and Egypt. And this week, the UN declared that the worst humanitarian crisis in the world was getting worse, with displacement, hunger and disease all increasing. With the Sudanese army back in the capital city, can the Sudanese people expect any respite? Can a country with a history of military rule hope for democracy in a post-war Sudan? And who are the external forces vying for a piece of Sudan's mineral-rich pie? My name is Rosabelle Crean, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. The war in Sudan erupted in 2023 when the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, turned on each other in an explosion of violence. Previously, in 2021, the two parties had worked together to overthrow a joint military-civilian transitional government. But as disagreements over the direction of rule flared, the two generals clashed and shots were fired. While much of the world's attention has been focused on the unending tragedy in Gaza, the war in Sudan has continued to tear the country and the lives of Sudanese people apart. Recent months have seen major developments in the conflict. RSF fighters pushed into the northern state to take control of a key triangle land border between Egypt, Libya and Sudan. Meanwhile, Sudanese Army Chief Burhan made 2 international visits. He popped up in Spain for a United Nations conference, and then, less surprisingly, he was in Alamein in Egypt for a meeting with President Sisi, a staunch supporter of the Sudanese army. Hamid Khalafallah is a Sudanese researcher and policy analyst at the University of Manchester in the UK.
He's always been going back and forth between Sudan and Egypt. So Egypt, he has the legitimacy there anyway, and these are, his patrons in many ways, and the people who call the shots with regards to what SAF does in many ways.
As part of Burhan's efforts to gain legitimacy over his governance, he installed a new technocrat-style Prime Minister, Camille Idris, on the 31st of May, and in July, new so-called civilian cabinet members.
I think the visit to Spain and, attending, such high-level UN conventions, and obviously he's been to the UN General Assembly as well in New York last year. And I think that approach obviously is quite problematic. It's very appalling how the UN still does not have a system that stops this in many ways. The African Union, since the coup in 2021, has, suspended Sudan's membership and has not been treating the army as the sovereign of the country or as the state in any way in Sudan, and has done that because there was an unconstitutional change of government, which was a military coup in Sudan. The UN does not have that mechanism, has not been doing that, has continued to recognize staff as the government of Sudan, which is quite problematic. This has only prolonged the war. This has only caused more suffering amongst the Sudanese population because staff continued to politicize and manipulate aid, and all of that was empowered by the UN's recognition of staff. And then continuing that in, such international events and so on is absolutely problematic, serves SAF's agenda very much, and undermines the demands and the suffering of the people of Sudan on the ground.
As the general jets off to United Nations conferences back home, his soldiers are engaged in fierce fighting in several parts of the country, including El Fasher, the strategic capital of the large North Darfur state in the west of the country. With fighting creeping towards the Egyptian and Libyan borders, and RSF reportedly in control of the smuggling routes and local gold mines, both essential for the group's operations, there are concerns in Cairo and Tripoli. Both neighbouring countries have stakes in this war. Egypt is a close ally of the Sudanese armed forces, and Sisi has supported and hosted Burhan on multiple occasions over the past few years. And Libya's strongman leader, General Khalifa Haftar, who is engaged in his own power struggle, is allegedly propping up the RSF by helping it smuggle weapons into Sudan and sending fighters to boost its ranks. But Sisi and Haftar are not the only ones facing accusations of involvement in the war.
The RSF have had control over massive gold mines pre-war, and obviously during the war, they maintained this control and continued to kind of extract gold and sell it illicitly to many actors, but the biggest buyer is the United Arab Emirates, of course, the UAE.
The Sudanese army accuses the UAE of backing the RSF and even carrying out drone strikes and supplying ammunition to the militia group. In April, Reuters news agency reported that UN investigators were looking into how Bulgarian-made mortar rounds sold to the UAE ended up in a supply convoy for the RSF seized in North Darfur. The Gulf state denies allegations of involvement, but its political and business interest in Sudan, as an outpost on the continent, for resources, minerals, and trade by land and sea, is believed to be deeply appealing to Abu Dhabi and its state-affiliated companies. The UAE is the world's top buyer of gold from Sudan, a sector that is mainly run by RSF leader Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, who is himself a wealthy and well-connected businessman with family business ties in the Gulf state.
The UAE's role is very problematic for so many reasons, but amongst it is that although they're, most infamously known for how they're supporting the rapid support forces, but from the background they're playing also a double agent kind of game. They buy gold from the RSF, and they buy gold from SAF as well. Their interest in Sudan's resources, be it gold or land and so on, is their top priority, and they will maintain it whichever way works. If it means working with SAF, sometimes they will work with SAF. If it means supporting a genocidal militia like the Rapid Support Forces, they will continue to support the Rapid Support Forces. And, this pattern is not exclusive to Sudan. We have seen how they do the same type of intervention in Libya, in Somalia, and in Ethiopia, amongst other places across the Horn, in which they acquire, in many ways, militias that are operating within these states, and they work to them through very illicit, informal, out-of-state kind of frameworks and so on to get resources.
Development group Swiss Aid estimated in a report last year that in 2022, 66.5% of the gold imported to the UAE from Africa was illegally smuggled out. In January of this year, the United States sanctioned Hemeti and 7 companies linked to the RSF. The US Treasury said the UAE-based companies are providing, quote, money and weapons to the RSF. Months later, the Emirati Justice Ministry said that the 7 sanctioned companies do not own valid business licenses and also don't operate in the UAE. More recently, an investigation by the New York Times accused Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, current Vice President and Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates and brother of the President, of being the architect behind the secret Emirati effort to smuggle drones and other weapons to the RSF. 8 months before the overthrow of the civilian government in Sudan, Hemeti was a guest of the Emirati Vice President at an arms fair in Abu Dhabi. Boiled down to its simplest terms, it suits the Emiratis to have assets in the Horn of Africa, and their presence on the continent also serves as a warning to regional rivals like Iran. But the flow of arms doesn't just fuel the fighting, it fuels the misery for the Sudanese people too. For its part, the RSF fiercely accuses the Egyptian Air Force of carrying out attacks on behalf of the Sudanese army, and others have called out Cairo's apparent double-faced role as it presents itself as a mediator. Precious metals and business aside, the war has wreaked havoc on an already impoverished population. Many Sudanese people remember the horror of the genocide in Darfur in the early 2000s carried out by the notorious Janjaweed, formed of Arab tribal militias who were armed by and under the command of the state army. Today, the Rapid Support Forces are bolstered by those same Janjaweed militiamen. They've been accused of committing human rights abuses, including ethnically motivated killings against non-Arab communities in Sudan back in the 2000s, and also today. One of the most serious allegations has been the use of rape as a weapon of war and other forms of gender-based violence. Sudanese activist and director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, Hala Al-Karib, explains that sexual violence has been a prolific war tool for many years.
It has been happening in all the pockets of conflicts that has been occurring in Sudan. It has been happening in Darfur for the past 22 years or 23 years or more. It happened before in Nuba Mountains during the genocide in Nuba Mountains in the 1990s. Violence against women has always been an instrumental war tool and war strategy that was used to intimidate communities. It was used for land grabbing. It was used for forced evictions, and it was used for controlling and force communities to submit. So Sudanese political elites and militarized elites have used this for decades. It continued to be a concealed issue that nobody wants to confront it. And so it continued to happen in a very wide scale. And then you have a massive number of militarized groups that were never being held accountable. The RSF or the Janjaweed, they were never being held accountable for the atrocities they have been committing throughout the years, being in Darfur or later in Khartoum, So if you continue to get away with it, on contrary, you are promoted, you are given positions, you are acknowledged, not only nationally, but also at the international level. So why not? Why would you give away on such a strategy?
Last year, Human Rights Watch released an 89-page report documenting widespread acts of sexual violence in Khartoum since the start of the current conflict. It said that the RSF have raped, gang-raped, and forced countless women and girls into marriage in residential areas in the Sudanese capital. There are concerns that women are being held by RSF in conditions that could be tantamount to sexual slavery.
So women in Darfur, they are targeted for who they are, for their ethnic identity, but also for their gender identity. And women in Khartoum have been targeted for their gender identity primarily, for just being women. Sudan at the moment easily can be classified as the capital of sexual violence, considering the level of impunity, and the historical impunity as well. And the fact that despite all the rhetoric about, protections of women and what's happening to women, the reality is there is no investment on the ground protecting women and girls at all, or on protecting civilians against conflict-related sexual violence, because even men and boys are exposed to rape as well.
Sprawling displacement camps have become home for thousands of families as the militiamen rampage across the country, burning villages. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, known as OCHA, Sudan is the world's largest internal displacement crisis. On June 3rd, a spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees gave an update on the ever-worsening problems in Sudan.
As of yesterday, 4 million people now have fled Sudan into neighboring country since the start of the war, now in its third year. the 4 million people, a devastating milestone in what is the world's most damaging displacement crisis at the moment. If the conflict continues in Sudan, 1,000 more people, we expect 1,000 more people will continue to flee, putting regional and global stability at stake.
Hala says that women are at the forefront of this humanitarian crisis.
They are the frontline defenders. They are the ones who are they are the caregivers. They are the ones who are making critical decisions about their community's safety and security. In a region like Darfur or in South Kordofan, cities and villages that's under siege, women are the ones who smuggle food and basic health medications and things like that, to their communities and expose themselves to torture and to risks. All this is been happening, but until now, there is no structural form of support that is dedicated to respond to the violations that women encountering in Sudan.
I asked Hala if there is anywhere that is safe in Sudan right now.
It's very difficult to say there is a place that's 100% or at least safe for women and girls. The vulnerability is very high everywhere. However, territories that RSF is not there is relatively okay. Relatively. At least women can go to the market. They can go to school, in areas where schools are open. They can move from point A to point B. There's no 100% guarantee for the safety, but there is relative safety.
One of the largest camps for internally displaced Sudanese is Zamzam camp near the city of El Fasher in North Darfur state, which has been under siege for over a year as battles rage between the RSF and the Sudanese army. In April of this year, Zamzam came under a terrifying attack mounted by the RSF. An estimated 400,000 people were forced to flee the camp in less than 3 weeks. One woman told reporters of her ordeal. They burned all our homes, we have nothing, and after 4 to 5 days we set out for Tawila. They found us on the road and took our donkeys, mattresses, blankets, everything. We arrived barefoot with nothing at all. Video footage that emerged at the time showed fighters rounding up local elderly men. And in one video, verified by Sky News, an unarmed man is shot dead as he lies on the ground. The horror and suffering of war continues. But what do the Sudanese people want? Who do they want as their leader? Is there any support on the ground for the two clashing generals? Back to political researcher Hamid Khafala.
In the context of war, it's very difficult and also in many ways unfair to try to decide who has, between the warring factions, who has more kind of support. Because the politics of war and of people living in the war are very much politics of survival. Everyone is supporting whoever gives them a higher chance of survival. Does that mean legitimacy? I don't think so. Does that mean that they want this person or this entity to rule the country? I don't think so. In that sense, you see a lot of areas where there's a lot of support to SAF, but also there are areas where there's a lot of support to the rapid support forces. And in both cases, these are either ethnic politics or survival politics. And neither are, politics that we want to see in Sudan. Neither are politics that the country appreciates. We were in a process of a democratic transition where people were very much adamant about having a fully civilian government, democratic civilian government ruling the country. And I don't think that aspiration or demand has changed in any way.
After 30 years in power, President Omar al-Bashir was ousted in 2019 during a popular revolution that culminated in an army-led coup. In the months following, in Sudanese towns and cities, dozens of resistance and grassroots organisations were formed based on democratic foundations as an alternative to decades of oppression under military governance. A joint military transitional government rooted in a power-sharing agreement was established, but was overthrown in another coup led by General Burhan in 2021, and attempts to put power back in the hands of civilians ultimately failed.
I don't think Sudan has had a legitimate government for a very long time. There is a legitimacy of the gun, which has dictated the situation for very, very long time. Even after the falling of Bashir, the political agreement that has brought faction of civilians, a hybrid government of civilians and military, was very volatile agreement that has huge limitation. But people, they were hoping that at least they could hold on to it to get into an elections, but the situation was so volatile and it didn't hold.
Most Sudanese have only lived under oppressive military rule, but there are many waiting in the wings for the chance to lay the bricks of a democratic state.
In Sumud, we believe that Sudan is a very diverse country, one of the most diverse countries in our continent, has been in a series of wars and instability because of the military rule, the dictatorship, the lack of vision to manage this diversity and try to impose one unilateral vision over the whole in Sudan.
This is Khaled Omar Youssef.
I'm the vice chairperson of the Sudanese Congress Party and a member of the Leadership Council of Sumud, which is the pro-peace and pro-democracy alliance in Sudan. I used to be the Cabinet Affairs Minister during the transition. I think after more than 5 decades of military rule, the military led Sudan to this disaster, and to change the direction, there is a need to a true civilian democratic transition that lead for a federal country, because also with the huge diversity in Sudan, the trying to have regime that very centered and deny the diversity of Sudan, that led actually as well to this disaster. So true federal system where the different regions be empowered and the people of this region rule themselves by themselves and contribute to the united Sudan equally as well is one of the needed to a better future for Sudan.
Sudan's massive geography and population of nearly 50 million people has presented multi-layered challenges throughout the war. Humanitarian organisations have struggled to get aid supplies to populations in remote areas cut off by fighting, while for the militias, its vast size has offered a cover for atrocities, and the danger has made it difficult for international media and humanitarians to safely operate inside. Politically, its diversity has weighed down past efforts to unite civilian parties.
This is not the first civil war in the history of Sudan, and it is not the first civil war in the history of the world. In Sudan, we had this experience before. Civil war that killed thousands of people and displaced millions. And by the end, a negotiated political solution stopped the war and start transition. Now we think the same should happen. But this time, there is a need for more deep reforms, because previously we witnessed some peace processes that resulted by the end power sharing deals, which was not sustainable at that time. This time, it is not about power sharing, it's about a full new framework of governance in Sudan that addressed the root causes of the problem in our country. We want to bring the majority of Sudanese to work together and to coordinate together, to put pressures on the two fighting parties to sit to the table, delegitimize this war, and call for a just and sustainable peace in Sudan. Also, part of our work is to advocate among the international and regional actors for coordinated effort by the world to put pressures on the two fighting parties to stop this meaningless war and to choose a peaceful settlement for this disaster.
The former cabinet minister is not the only one putting forward the suggestion of a federal system of governance for Sudan. Hala Al-Karib had this to add.
My own personal point of view, I definitely think that this war, if taught Sudanese something, that a centralized government would never work in Sudan. That Sudan definitely needs to seriously look at some form of confederation or decentralized form of governance that will allow people in different regions to have some control of their own regions and territory and establish their own local parliaments and things like that. If you look at right now, popular efforts to rehabilitate local territories, it's mostly community driven. It's mostly people, donating and rebuilding themselves. So I don't think Sudanese will allow again for a government that would come a parachuted government to land and just say this is. I don't think that can happen.
While the Sudanese diaspora can draw up plans for a post-war state, in the meantime, as everyone agreed, the most pressing matter is to stop the fighting and bring stability. Back to Khaled Omar Yusuf.
At this stage, what we need from the different international institutions and actors is one unified, strong position against the war and a strong belief in that there is no military solution for this crisis. So what is needed is to put pressures on the two fighting sides to sit to the negotiation to agree on immediate ceasefire and allow the humanitarian assistance to be delivered to the needed people, and to engage in a peace process that will lead for a transitional arrangement. We need this unified position from the international community.
So who from the international community is helping to stop the war?
Everyone here in our Africa Bureau and at the Department of State, and once again our superstar there, Mr. Boulos. What do you want to do next after you're done with this? Sudan. Yeah, very important. Actually, very, very important, and you're very involved in that as well. So what are you guys doing this week in Qatar? You guys want to work a little? We are grateful to all of you.
That was Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's Africa envoy Masad Boulos at the signing of a peace deal between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, brokered by Washington in June.
And we are really encouraged by the message that came from Washington and from Trump administration toward Sudan. Hopefully, this will end practical steps in the near future, because the situation keeps worsening day after day, and the suffering on the Sudanese people is beyond imagination. It is the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. Numbers are very clear. It went unfortunately forgotten for a very long time, but this is the time to remember Sudan and to do something to end this conflict.
So, is Sudan next? President Trump's dreams of a Nobel Peace Prize might spur him on to bring peace to another African nation. Hamid Khafala, the researcher, said that the Trump administration's deal-based approach towards such peace deals is promising.
What the Trump administration has is when they decide to want to have it, the political will to get things done, and also the leverage to exert pressure on regional actors that have been playing big parts in the war and have been, in many ways, the war is sustained through their support, mainly the UAE, as we mentioned, but also others like Egypt and so on.
And problematic.
But the problem is that the way they have been making peace, as we have seen since the Trump administration took office in January this year, is through deals, and deals that are very bad for the countries where the wars are happening. If you look into the Rwanda DRC deal, it's all about extracting DRC's minerals and providing, avenues for the US and other Western countries to exploit the resources of of DRC. In Sudan, we know how such deals would play out. It would also be about resources and continuation and consolidation of the exploitation of Sudan's resources. So that's why I think on one part, I want to see more action from the US to kind of influence the regional actors or to exert pressures on the regional actors to kind of end their intervention in Sudan in many ways. But I'm also very worried about what kind of deal would the US push as part of this peacemaking.
So, what is the most realistic scenario for the two warring parties? Who or what can bring them to the table? The United Nations said it was launching a renewed effort, but it has little leverage and recently failed to broker even a humanitarian ceasefire in the city of El Fasher, while Qatar has reportedly been talking to the Sudanese army. Will Masad Boulos and the White House move faster? Mr. Boulos's description of Sudan as an internal conflict in a recent interview with the Africa Report raised eyebrows and doubts from Sudan watchers.
The thing that would bring them to the table, very unfortunately, are not decisions that are made in Port Sudan or in El Fasher or Niala or El Junaina. These are decisions that are made in Abu Dhabi and Cairo. So the most realistic thing would be to get, people in Cairo and people in Abu Dhabi to stop their support to both parties and make them stop fighting in many ways. Obviously, that is not the entire picture. Like maybe on the 16th of April, one day after the war erupted, it was about SAF and the RSF. Today, there's a wide array of warring factions. There's so many people caught in the middle. And there's one very important group of people that no one kind of mentions, which is civilian groups who have been throughout the war, continue to mobilize, continue to provide support to people, and continue to say that they need to be central to whatever peace process that might come. So this is just to say, like, peacemaking or peace building in Sudan is not about what the rapid support forces and the Sudanese armed forces want, but that is a very important first step to get Abu Dhabi and Cairo to make them stop.
As the Sudanese army attempts to claim legitimacy in Khartoum, and the rapid support forces rampage north and secure further access to gold and smuggled weapons, there is little belief that the war itself will come to an end soon. For now, the most likely scenario is a split country, with the RSF rumoured to be preparing to announce the formation of a parallel government in the western regions under their control. Rather than advancing diplomacy, the outside powers are fueling the conflict by funneling weapons to their allies. The two generals, Hemeti of the RSF and Barhan of the Sudanese Armed Forces, seem to believe that continued fighting best serves their interests. All this at a huge cost to Sudan's men, women and children who face a future of further suffering. That is until global and regional power brokers decide to stop pouring fuel on the fires of war. This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Rosebell Crean. Our theme music was by Omar El-Fil. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified for when a new episode drops. You can find a link in the show notes. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can also check out our social media accounts on Instagram and X, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.